Good afternoon, good morning, good night, whatever is appropriate to your time zone. Welcome to this event. Just to make sure you are at the right event, this is the International Crisis Group's discussion on the situation in Nagorno-Karabakh and prospects for de-escalation. I am Olga Oliker. I direct the Europe and Central Asia program at Crisis Group, which is an independent non-governmental organization whose mission is to prevent wars, mitigate the effects of armed conflict and end armed conflict, and to otherwise shape policies to build a more peaceful world. Joining me in this conversation are my colleagues, Alessia Vartanyan, the senior analyst for the South Caucasus at Crisis Group, Zaur Shariev, the analyst for the South Caucasus at Crisis Group, and Oleg Ignatov, the senior analyst for Russia at Crisis Group. What we are going to do is chat amongst ourselves for a little bit and then open up to questions and answers. If you want to ask a question, guests, you should please type it into the Q&A box in your Zoom interface. And please, if you can, do share your name and affiliation. If you are, for whatever reason, uncomfortable doing that, please offer us something that will let us know how to refer to you. This event is being recorded. It is also being live streamed on Crisis Group's YouTube channel. So it is available for your friends and family to watch later after you have recommended it to them and for you to revisit. So I'm going to just start this off now by talking a little bit about what has happened, and then we will begin our conversation. So just about, very close to 3 years ago, the anniversary is coming up in just a couple of weeks. A 6-week war began between Armenia and Azerbaijan. At its end, in November of 2020, Armenian forces had been pushed out of Nagorno-Karabakh and the surrounding regions of Azerbaijan, territory that Armenian forces had at that point controlled for nearly 3 decades. That as a result of a previous full-scale war, which had ended in the early 1990s. In 2020, at the conclusion of the 6-week war, ethnic Armenian residents had fled for Armenia or for the part of Nagorno-Karabakh where Russian peacekeeping forces had deployed after the war. They had done so in accordance with a trilateral armistice agreement, which was signed by Baku, Yerevan, and Moscow. Since then, peace has been elusive, to say the least. Although Russia, the European Union, and the United States have done what they could to broker talks, there has not been any peace treaty that has resulted. In the course of these talks, Armenia has sought some sort of guarantees, security guarantees for the ethnic Armenians still living in Nagorno-Karabakh. Baku has said that these people will be protected by the same laws that protect all other Azerbaijani citizens, and has questioned whether they need anything additional at all. We have also seen fighting skirmishes along the new line of contact and also at the Armenian-Azerbaijani border over the course of these last 3 years, this despite the presence of Russian military personnel. Things got even more tense in the course of recent months. In late April, Baku established a checkpoint on the Lachin corridor, the only proper road connecting Armenia to Nagorno-Karabakh. It then shut down traffic going towards the enclave. The result has been a humanitarian crisis for the people living there, who have faced shortages of food and medical supplies and medical care as well. Most recently, we have seen Baku massing troops near Karabakh and its borders with Armenia, leading Armenians and the de facto leaders of the Nagorno-Karabakh community to fear a new attack, to fear that effectively Baku is planning to take by force what negotiations are failing to deliver. So with that, I'm going to start by asking Zaur, what is it that Azerbaijan wants?
Thank you, Olio. I think, in a sense, Azerbaijan is looking for a compromise from other parties while retaining the flexibility to set its own terms. It wants others to agree to its specific conditions, but it is not willing to make similar concessions in return. This is the short answer to this question, but in larger form, I think Azerbaijan perspective on the peace talks with Armenia and its stance on talks with de facto leaders of the Armenians in Nagorno-Karabakh differ. So while Armenia, Azerbaijan is interested in signing a peace agreement that does not address the security and rights of ethnic Armenians, Baku has made it clear that it opposes the involvement of the third parties in defining these issues. Essentially, it seeks to disassociate the Karabakh issue from the Armenia and does not intend to be beholden to any international partners. But when it comes to the Armenian populated region of Nagorno-Karabakh, Baku's current objectives are twofold. The one is that, on the one hand, Azerbaijan aims to secure the use of Agdam-Maskeran road for delivery of humanitarian goods. On the other hand, it shows reluctance in opening the Latvian route. If the Latvian route is to open, Baku makes it clear that it will come at a cost. There will be customs and not everything will be allowed to pass through. As for political aspects of ongoing crisis, it's worth noting that there is no active political process at the moment between Azerbaijan and de facto leaders. And Baku describes the situation as one requiring integration, insisting on the talks without involvement of the third parties. So Azerbaijan is stipulates that major security issues must be resolved first in these talks, and this includes the demands for disarmament, which is not a new position of Baku. So following that, the focus will be shifted to this discussion on the subordination of the ethnic Armenians to Azerbaijan authority in both the short and medium terms.
Thank you so much, Zaur. Alisa, tell us what are you hearing from Nagorno-Karabakh? What is the mood there? How does it look there?
Those who continue living in Nagorno-Karabakh, they feel trapped. For more than 9 months, the region has been mainly isolated because of the blockade that started last December, and that has led to a severe shortage of the food and medical supplies to the local population. It has intensified since midsummer. There were a number of attempts to find a solution, both to address the issues that have been changing throughout always 9 months, coming either from Baku or those who are associated with the Azerbaijani government. And the current attempts are continuing. We see the foreign mediators investing into it, but it is just the case, we see it, that everything is falling apart, either because there are new demands coming or some new proposal happening. And in light of all these problems, the locals now face a new fear, with the more troops that are getting stationed close to the line of contact in Nagorno-Karabakh, which is definitely not something that one would want to see after so many problems that have been happening for so many months now.
Thank you, Alisa. Zaur, how worried are you that there is going to be renewed conflict, that Azerbaijani troops are going to cross the line and take control of the territory by force?
I think the risk is considerably high. I think that while any war in border regions, border areas with Armenia may be less likely, the potential for military action in and around Armenian populated Karabakh is greater. Especially in the recent weeks, we see the prevalent question is whether we are on the brink of the new war and its potential impact on the regional affairs and peace process. But many in Baku believes that these military trainings announced in July and there is nothing, it's not pre-planned, but we see that in back to September 2021 and 2022, joint military exercise, particularly between Azerbaijan and Armenia, took place in September in the last 2 years. And some people in Baku say that this is nothing the new. But however, the problem is that there is absence, or more accurately to say that stagnation of the political process exacerbates these concerns. So this is the main reason. But also we know that if the military escalation occurs in Armenian populated Karabakh in the coming days or weeks, and it wouldn't be surprising, but consequences of this military action will be hard. I mean, on the one hand, this will shatter any willingness of the portion of the population in Nagorno-Karabakh to resolve the issues with Baku proposed framework, and this could be also a consequential decision. And also, this will, on the other hand, it will have a negative impact to the Baku-Yerevan talks on peace agreement, and this will end up with the failure of the Western mediation in this process. So that's why the consequences will be very, very negative. So,
thank you, Zohar. Alisa, do you agree? And importantly, how, if there is military action, what would happen next? What would it result in?
For almost a year, there is a presence of the EU monitors that are monitoring, they are observing the situation along the Armenian-Azerbaijani border, not inside Nagorno-Karabakh, but still, you know, they are the ones who are seeing the trends, and we have been following their reports, and they already spoke about with increased tensions in the areas. Even more, we at Crisis Group, we have been following always trends, and I can tell you that the analysis of even the reports and of different incidents and different cases that are taking place, clashes, they show that in spring there are many more situations, many more incidents taking place at the front line, both inside Nagorno-Karabakh, but especially at the border. If a new fighting is to start, I'm afraid that everyone more or less understands that it will be a very short fight that Armenia will have a hard time to respond to, not to mention Nagorno-Karabakh itself, that does not really have an army anymore. It's a very different situation from what we had in 2020. In our report, in January, we described how vulnerable Armenia feels with Azerbaijani troops, that the Azerbaijani army, which is much stronger, and the troops stationed at the mountainous areas, that it will take them very little. It will be a matter maybe of hours for the Azerbaijani army to get control of more territories, and maybe even effectively cutting Armenia in two, leading to enormous humanitarian consequences and some irreversible changes in the whole region. So this is something that I would say many foreign mediators understand, and that's why we are seeing such a strong push coming from all the key capitals to prevent this escalation from happening.
So, so Alisa, what exactly are they doing? What are the US, the EU and its member states, any other important actors actually doing to prevent war?
Since we started observing with stalemate in the talks, and I would say that it started in mid-summer, there were so many calls, so many diplomats visiting the region. At some point, I had a sense that none of them had a summer vacation, just because they spent so much time in the region, going between Baku and Yerevan, speaking to de facto authorities in Nagorno-Karabakh, trying to find a way to get back them to the table, make Baku understand that negotiations still make sense, that there is a way to resolve some of these concerns and some of these problems through the talks. And then what has been happening is them trying to still remind Baku about the key red line that the fighting and the attacks at Nagorno-Karabakh will lead to certain consequences. What exactly it will be, it's a good question. And I think this is something where the conversations are going. When it comes to Russia, we see that it still feels pretty much handcuffed because of its invasion of Ukraine, but even Russia has started trying and making more attempts to somehow have an impact on the ground, which is perceived in a different way here in the region, but it's still something that we haven't seen Russia doing for quite some time.
Thanks, Alisa. I'm going to then actually bring Oleg in on this because he is our senior Russia analyst. So Oleg, what is your take on how the Russians are looking at the situation?
So first of all, Moscow is not interested in the war. That's for sure. But at the same time, they're saying that for the last months, Baku and Yerevan have created new facts that are related to the agreement of 2020. First of all, Azerbaijan controls the Lachen corridor, and this was a direct violation of the agreement. And the Russians said this. Yes, their first reaction was to return to the agreement. It failed, and then they said that maybe we should renegotiate to negotiate a new agreement. But again, those attempts failed. And after this, they proposed this idea that there should be two roads and this road should be opened simultaneously. Again, this negotiation are ongoing, but this is also a Western position right now. And second thing, I would pay attention to the recent Putin's comments on the situation. And I think these comments show that Russia is in the process of reassessment of its understanding of what is happening in between Armenia and Azerbaijan. Putin said that Yerevan has recognized Azerbaijan's territorial integrity, and it was done on paper, he said. And he said that he made it clear that this means that if Moscow wants to, or anybody else wants to discuss now the situation in Nagorno-Karabakh, it should do it directly with Baku. So it means that Armenia, for example, according to this Putin statements, can discuss the issue of Nagorno-Karabakh, for example, without Baku consent. Yes, and of course, this question immediately arises whether this means that the future of Russian peacekeepers in the region, since they are in the Karabakh, Moscow can also discuss only with Baku. Yes, because if we look at the 2020 agreement, it means that this issue should be discussed, but could be discussed by both sides, by Armenia and Azerbaijan. And Putin has said that peacekeepers remain for the time being, but he also made it clear that after Yerevan decisions to recognize Azerbaijan territorial integrity, events in Karabakh may be irreversible. Yes, and of course, Moscow don't say it openly, but everybody is saying that Azerbaijan's goals is to establish a physical control of the Nagorno-Karabakh. So in physical control means disarmament and a dissolution of de facto authorities, yes? And they say that after this Armenian agreement about Baku, Azerbaijan territorial integrity, it could be, nobody could do anything against this position. So it's a matter of time, and it depends how it happened.
Thank you, Oleg. Zaur, what is the perspective from Baku on both Russia's new statements and engagement and on the efforts by other countries to convince Azerbaijan to back down?
Thank you, Olya. I think the Azerbaijan perception of Russian role is not uniform. I mean, some view Russian role as a spoiler, believing that Moscow doesn't want a Western-led peace process or a successful peace agreement between Baku and Yerevan. However, others view Russian role as a more sincere than West, and they believe that if Russia prioritizes and actions align with Baku's interests, so then Russia isn't seen an hindrance. In such scenario, Baku perceives itself as having some leverage against Russia. So I think recently, what Alex said, I think this latter view seems to be more prevalent, especially over the past few months. But the perception can swiftly change based on whether Moscow aligns with Baku's strategic interests or not. But right now, I think it seems that its role is welcomed. But one significant consensus in Baku is that Moscow lacks substantial economic or political means to influence Baku. So this belief empowers Baku to negotiate on equal footing with Moscow, especially during the period when Russia faced Western sanctions. And also Azerbaijan's strategic position connecting the outsider world via Iran and its alliance with Turkey serves as a stabilizing factor in Moscow-Baku relations. So right now, as Oleg said, that in the last few months, we see that the Russian role seen much more sincere and welcomed in Baku than the Western role.
Thank you so much, Alessa. And in Yerevan, what is the perspective on all of this? What does Armenia still think it might be able to get?
In Armenia, it is frustration that is turning into anger. That frustration started with Russia's distraction when Russia attacked Ukraine. It diverted all its diplomatic, everything, all the resources basically to its war there, and with increasing problems, and Azerbaijan feeling emboldened to continue its processes of basically forcing Armenia and Nagorno-Karabakh to agree to many of the things that it wants to achieve. Russia stayed inactive, passive, without really doing much. And in the beginning, there was some certain understanding in Armenia, but the longer it went, the more we saw Armenian officials trying to find some alternative, and not necessarily only in the West, but for example, with some partners in the Middle East, or looking for some other places that could help to deliver at least some elementary, for example, weaponry or some other things that could help to defend the country. Even there, they started seeing that Russia is pulling the process. And then this is really very alarming and very problematic, because Armenia is very much dependent on Russia on all different fronts. It's starting not only with the security, Russia is very well present in economy. These are the links that cannot change overnight. And even more, we cannot really see that the European Union or the United States or anyone else in the world is currently considering offering to Armenia something very fast and easy to achieve. For these things to happen, still the keys are in finding the peace and some more stability with Azerbaijan and Turkey. And then, so in a way, you know, Armenia finds itself in this situation when it doesn't like what's happening with Russia, but it doesn't have much alternative either.
And for the de facto authorities in Nagorno-Karabakh, I mean, surely the people of Nagorno-Karabakh would like to make sure they have access to food and medical care. What do their leaders still hope to get under these conditions?
You know, many people who went to Nagorno-Karabakh after the 2020 war, they went there despite much insecurity, a lot of uncertainty, so much risk that the people took. They went there because they were the Russian peacekeepers and they were guaranteeing their lives there. And unfortunately, during this year and a half, and with attacks that are coming from Azerbaijan with the blockade, with Armenia's inability to also find a way to negotiate the peace in a good faith, so that there is a longer term stability. Of course, that all reflects on the way people start perceiving the Russian peacekeepers. They were very instrumental during this blockade in terms of delivering the humanitarian aid for quite some time. That was not necessarily only things that were coming from Russia. A lot of that was Armenian diaspora and Armenia itself purchasing and just using the Russian peacekeepers for transportation. But even that finished. They now have to deliver the food and diesel for themselves with helicopters. And then we should demonstrate to you their inability to find a way to somehow find a leverage on Azerbaijan. That leads to enormous frustration and a lot of people getting scared about their future, just because they also understand that it's not really very easy to find an alternative for the very moment.
Thank you. Oleg, can you explain to us a little bit what has happened to sour the Armenia-Russia relationship so much recently? I mean, they are technically still treaty allies, but you wouldn't know it if you're following the rhetoric coming out of both capitals. What's going on?
I'll try to explain, yes, but it's difficult, yes, but I will try. So to put it simple, yes, Armenia is in the situation when it has a military threat from Azerbaijan. Yes, but in this situation, Armenia tries to abandon its security cooperation from Russia. And that's what Russians are seeing right now. And for them, and they are saying this openly, that this policy is self-destructive. They really, so if you ask them, they really don't understand why Armenia is doing this. They sincerely believe that the policy of current Armenia is not in its interest. And if you look at the situation from 2020, you see that Russia has a clear strategy, and this strategy was not in favor of Azerbaijan, because what Russia was doing, they said, let's change the agenda, let's change the agenda of negotiations, let's talk about economic, let's talk about transportation. Let's not talk about status because nobody agrees on this. Yes, let's not talk about what nobody has an agreement on. Yes. Secondly, Moscow said that let's try to delay the issues that Baku wanted to discuss, but Yerevan didn't want to discuss. For example, this was the issue of Karabakh. Yes, Baku wanted to discuss Karabakh, Yerevan didn't want to discuss. And the third thing, they tried to react to incidents. Yes, when all of these incidents on the border started, they said, let's discuss delimitation. Yes, but when the war in Ukraine started, yes, the Minsk group was abandoned. Yes, it doesn't exist anymore. And after that, the Western countries took lead in the negotiations. Yes, and according to Moscow, that's what I said. They agreed on the territorial integrity of Azerbaijan. Yes, and in this situation, Armenia agreed on this, but it continued to delay its signing there. It doesn't want to sign the agreement. Yes, it agrees on integrity, doesn't want to sign the agreement. Baku is ready to change the status quo in Karabakh by using force, or at least it shows that it's ready to do this. And in this situation, Armenia abandons its security cooperation with Russia. That's how it looks like for Russia. Yes, and again, because of this, we see all of this like anti-Armenian, not anti-Armenian, but anti-Pashinyan propaganda on the Russian media. And they're very, very sincere about this, yes, that but as Armenia now is in a situation when it risks its own sovereignty, yes. Recently, Peskov said, yes, maybe Russia still has commitments towards on Armenia, yes, security commitments. So it means if Azerbaijan attacks Armenia, Russia still has, Russia must defend Armenia, yes, according to its commitments. But in the situation where Armenia is abandoning its security cooperation, so the situation could be open, yes, for them, for Russians. And that's what they're saying right now.
Thank you. I'm going to ask Zaur first and then Alesa what they think about Iran's role in all of this, if any. So Zaur first.
Thank you, Olia. This is, as we know, that the relations between Azerbaijan and Iran have been tense for some time now, and due to a range of issues, and despite attempts to de-escalate tension in recent months. But one significant point of the contention related to Azerbaijan Armenian context is a proposed transport route that will connect mainland Azerbaijan with its enclave, bypassing Armenian territory. Tehran has described any change of the land as a red line. In a sense, Iran has signaled that its opposition to any military escalation in the internationally recognized borders, especially the Iran-Armenian border. And some suggested that Azerbaijan might forcefully gain control of the portion of Armenian land to establish a proposed connectivity. However, Baku has denied such intentions. But what's the risk and Iran's role is that at present, everyone sees that Baku seems keen on avoiding confrontation with Tehran, and any involvement from Iran could swiftly escalate a localized conflict or escalation between Armenia and Azerbaijan to international military action, let's say a broader regional one. And any accidental or let's say intentional military action might also draw Azerbaijan ally Turkey, turning a potential Azerbaijan-Armenian war into a wider regional standoff. So that's the biggest risk.
Alesa, anything you'd like to add on that?
Iran often pursues its own interest in the region, and sometimes it may also have some ambitions in the things that Iran sees as part of its interest in the South Caucasus. Some of which can coincide with what we hear from Yerevan. And one very issue is, of course, Iran's insistence on the refusal to have some sort of corridor, or what Azerbaijan wants, something extraterritorial, something that will be not controlled by Armenia, but in fact will have more controls of Azerbaijan or Turkey. That does not necessarily mean that Iran would oppose, for example, the Russian presence at that very road. in that sense, of course, with this kind of the standing that Iran has been taking, that coincides with what we hear in Armenia. But does it mean that Iran would go for something bolder or something bigger than what we have seen so far in its relations with Azerbaijan? There are many questions around that. Iran has its own issues, its own problems. It reportedly offered some of its assistance to Armenia, which Armenia preferred not to take because of still kind of the hopes that they have from its cooperation, that Armenia can develop with the Western countries. And then the Western countries, we know very well, they have a clear standing on Iran's engagements, especially when it comes to some military relations. The other aspect to that is probably the what basically, what people have spoken about with 3+3, that the format that has been getting pushed by Azerbaijan, first of all, but also with Russia's support and Turkey. And Iran saw this format as something that would allow it to take a bigger role in the things related to the South Caucasus. But we also see that Iran's problems with Azerbaijan have effectively prevented from the functioning of this format that again kind of may frustrate Iran, but not probably to the point when it would take a clear stance in support of Armenia.
Thanks. So last question before we go to Q&A is to Zaur. Zaur, what, if anyone, does have leverage and influence over Baku that could shift its decision-making? I mean, is it Ankara? Is it Washington? Who could still make a difference?
Thank you, Oli. I think answering this question is both easy and complex. The easiest part is that the one might argue that no external entity, the force, has direct influence over Baku, not even Ankara. Because in Baku, it is seen as a misconception that Ankara can dictate or change Baku's decision, especially in relation to Armenia or overall the conflict context. This is mainly because Ankara and Baku rarely, if ever, diverge in this stance on these issues. So thus labeling Ankara's role as influential is somewhat misleading, since they often share a unified viewpoint. But more complex part of this answer is that who might be potentially influenced. The many assumes that the Western countries, powers given the current geopolitical landscape after the war in Ukraine, might hold some sway. But however, many in Baku perceive the West, and particularly the United States, stance on the conflict as biased and disappointing. This sentiment somehow was only intensified in the recent months. Also, Baku felt that this did not adequately address or respect its grievance arising from the conflict over the last 30 years. And this perception diminished the likelihood of any Western country influencing a shift in Baku's perspective. Even the discussion surrounding targeted sanctions, which one might have been a cause for concern in Baku, now seems less threatening. If such sanctions were imposed, Baku believes that it will reflect negatively on the West's position in the regional matters, ranging from energy, pipelines, and transport issues to the integration of Central Asia with Europe. Baku is confident that its geopolitical position, asserting that its concern is crucial of any regional projection to materialize. So in a way, in a sum, I think no external power appears to have play and definite influence over Baku.
Thank you. So with that, I think I would like to turn to audience questions, which I see have been building up nicely in our Q&A. And I also see, looking through them, that I think we've answered at least some of them as we've gone along in our discussion. But let me pull out a question from Thijs Korsten, who asked about, okay, well, what reintegration models have been discussed for Nagorno-Karabakh, either by Baku or Yerevan? What visions for this do you think might still be feasible? I'll start with Arisa and then go to Zaur with that.
Unfortunately, there haven't been anything that was officially discussed or even officially proposed. We have heard a lot of gossips about Azerbaijan discussing different models and preparing different papers on that. So far, there haven't been a single foreign diplomat who was invited to discuss with issues, not to mention either people from Stepanakert or those in Yerevan. So that's probably a big problem because if on the one hand we hear Azerbaijani officials speaking about reintegration and why it's important, but on the other hand there is absolutely nothing that can be become an invitation to this process so that the local Armenians can get at least a hope that there is a possibility for them to stay at home and to have a decent life without such conversations, without such negotiations between representatives of Stepanakert and the representatives of Baku, and possibly with the international involvement. It's really very difficult to see how to get out of this conflict and this problem that has been lasting for over 30 years.
Thanks. So I want to ask Zaur if he has anything to add to that, and also raise a question that something Alessia alluded to, and the question we have from Kanul Sahin, which is what about the question of direct talks between the de facto authorities and Baku? What has happened to that? So Zaur, can you talk a little bit about both prospects for integration models and prospects for talks?
I think we know that there were many models that floated between during the 2 wars period, and it is they made a reference to different models. But after the end of the war between Azerbaijan and Armenia, we haven't seen anything on paper or any model is explicitly actually mentioned by Azerbaijani government. Some models, some reference made, some less ethnic, the minorities living in different countries. But basically, the main line in Baku is that actually we cannot make anything to public. We have an integration plan, but this should be part of the discussion between Azerbaijan and representative from the Armenian populated Nagorno-Karabakh. So whether we have such a plan or not, we don't know. It's not publicized and materialized. So also some Western countries often criticize that Baku doesn't make it public. It can make things go much more easier. I mean, people will have a much more understanding what Baku is going to offer. But in Baku, we hear that Baku say that it's a negotiation position, why we should share everything that what we are going to deliver. So, but in a sense, I think we don't have anything. So to make a reference that whether there will be municipality, let's say the model that they will have a right or they will have a role, or what kind of cultural rights or the language others. So often it's described in Baku as a topic that should discuss with the representative of the Armenian populated Nagorno-Karabakh. About the talks, I mean, we see that this is on pause since the March. The last meeting was in March, if I'm not mistaken, and we haven't seen any new talks. And there were some much more hope that after election a new de facto leader, they will be resuming of these talks. But definitely one thing is clear that the talk is necessary, and this is very important for moving forward. So and also if there will be any talks, I think we will have a less concern about any kind of military trainings or kind of the things.
Oleg, you wanted to jump in on this?
Yes, there was a Russian proposal, and it was leaked by Armenians in summer. Yes, and if you this was the only document which was leaked about how the relations between Armenians and Baku will look like in Nagorno-Karabakh. But I haven't seen any reactions from Baku on this document, and from Armenia too.
Thank you. We have a few questions about Turkey's role, which we touched on a little bit. I don't know if anybody has more to add about why. Alessia, about why Turkey isn't trying to do more to alleviate tensions. It has had an improving relationship with Armenia. It has a very strong alliance with Azerbaijan. Surely a war is not good for Ankara. So what's going on? Alesa?
Well, I would just add one nuance there. You know, during the 2020 war, Turkey, not just diplomatically, but also in all other ways, supported Azerbaijan. And I heard the Armenian senior officials telling me very openly that they learned the lesson. And because of that, we have been seeing the Armenian senior leadership investing heavily in finding the ways to establish a relationship with Ankara, to the point when even like big portions of the Armenian population questioned the decision, for example, of the Armenian prime minister who went to the inauguration of President Erdogan recently. And there were many other examples. And of course, right now, when there is with looming escalation, people are asking this question, what will be Turkey's role? Will it again take the same stance when we saw mercenaries being sent and a lot of weaponry being also delivered from Turkey and alleged participation of the Turkish military in all these processes? And there is no answer to that yet. But there was a very important development with President Erdogan giving a call to President Aliyev and then Prime Minister Pashinyan. Of course, as Zaur said, there is nothing 100%. I mean, there is nothing that can guarantee everything and resolve the conflict, and with so many complexities and withstanding problems right now. But still, you know, it's better than nothing, I would say. And then Turkish stance and role in, if the war starts, it will be it will be crucial in with prospects of what Armenia will look like after this war, what territories it might control, whether it will be the state again or not.
And I think that, sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, I just want to add to something on Baku Stepanakert proposed idea. I mean, Oleg mentioned the Russian suggestion. I mean, I don't know, of course, maybe we are just getting too much into detail. There was a reaction from the Armenian side. Stepanakert clearly did not like what Moscow proposed. Yerevan absolutely hated. Maybe it's not something that you will hear in official statements in public, but you know, any person who read with 2 pages that were leaked by some people, they will tell you that it's word that even like ethnic minority representative living in Russia, less rights promised by the Russian side. And when you look at this, kind of the idea that you get is basically that Russia is trying to destroy the attempts to launch the talks between Baku and Stepanakert that have been going on for almost a year, with a very strong push coming from the European Union and the United States, with Azerbaijan having to agree, because there were 2 attempts to have a meeting in Europe, and both attempts were disrupted by Russia, first by exercising the pressure on the facto authorities in Stepanakert, and the next time it was with making this kind of very, very beautiful offers that could find traction in Baku.
Thank you. I want to bring forward a question from William Higgins, who's asking, what about the United Nations, right? As senior officials converge on New York for UN General Assembly meetings, why the silence? What is the UN helpless here? Is the UN too focused on other wars? What's going on? I think I'll turn to Zaur first.
I think that currently everyone is expected that UN General Assembly will be a venue for Azerbaijan, Armenia, and the foreign ministers to meet. Unfortunately, the signals that coming from the region is that suggesting that this meeting is not going to take place. But this such meeting would be essential important for both sides to resume the talks and also to discuss, and also this can also elevate any kind of the risk of the war. But what kind of a specific role of the United Nations? I think United Nations and different agencies of the United Nations wanted to play a role in this, the context, especially many suggestions made about the sending humanitarian missions to assess the situation or to help the development goals. So, but we haven't seen the Baku doesn't want to see any of the third parties, also international engagement or internationalization, especially involvement of the United Nations in this respect. So that's why we haven't seen, especially we know that one important aspect that even the United Nations Refugee Agency role is described in the ceasefire agreement in 2020. We haven't seen the United Nations Refugee Agency playing any role. So that's why the United Nations is absent from the context. But some believes that if there will be let's say the peace agreement between Azerbaijan and Armenia, then might be the United Nations Security Council could play a role about the sealing this agreement, making a much more international sealed agreement. So there is the different speculations, but for currently, I think the most important one, if it's going to be changed, is that a meeting of the Azerbaijan and Armenian leaders under the auspice of the United Nations General Assembly.
Thank you. I mean, that would certainly help, but right now it doesn't seem particularly likely. We've got a question for Oleg, specifically from Mikhail Polyansky from PRIF, asking if we think that it's possible that Russia is going to pull its peacekeeping troops out of the region. And beyond that, might it actually close down its military base in Armenia if Armenia continues to treat its alliance with Russia as not all that useful? What do you think?
It's a good question, and nobody has an answer to this question. Yes, right now, because Putin said that they are still there, and nobody said that the agreements 2020 agreements are not working anymore. Yes, and until somebody says that they are not working, so the peacekeepers will stay there. They will still be there until 2025. Yes, but again, we see that Putin said that new facts appeared. Yes, and if somebody creates new facts, and after these facts, peacekeepers will not be able to stay there, we can't exclude the situation that when they will have to withdraw before 2025. That's when we are talking about a possible military conflict.
Thank you. Alisa, do you see prospects for a real fundamental realignment for Armenia going forward? This draws on, we have a few questions about the drills that are ongoing with the United States. Of course, for those to be ongoing now, they would have had to have been planned quite a long time in the past, so they can't quite be seen as a response to current events, but they do seem symptomatic. And then, so we have a question about those from Jason Lang, and then we also have a question from Kurt Ebik about Armenian visions for the region in the future. And I think we had another question about the impact on domestic politics in Armenia, possible evolutions. So I don't know if you could wrap all that into a minute or so, but when you're thinking about Armenia's future, do you think seismic shifts are likely, and does it matter what happens in the next few weeks, or are there just trend lines that are kind of in motion and they're going forward regardless?
When you look at Armenia and what's happening now, it's definitely not something that has been kind of in making for just kind of couple of days. I think I lost the count of how many statements or interviews Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan gave, and that provoke a lot of scandals, But if you look at what's happening with Armenia, of course, the current problems, they come from the fact that Russia invaded one of its neighbors. And then this is something that is alarming, especially for those who are allies on paper, and then Armenia is one of them. For Armenia, the current invasion of Ukraine is elucidation. if Russia wins, then this will be Russia that probably will be asking and pushing for the things even more. If Russia loses, then Armenia may have even more problems with Azerbaijan, Turkey, and will probably not have possibility to defend itself. So in this current situation, what the Armenian government has been doing is, on the one hand, finding the way to prevent a new war, a new escalation that Armenia clearly will not be able to stand, because it lost the war in 2020. Its army is absolutely destroyed. It doesn't have normal supply roads and even funds to pay for much of this. It also has some problems with its army, even domestically. And on the other hand, it's also to pave the way for keeping your state and increasing the chances that Armenia will stay on the map, no matter what will be the scenarios with war going on in Ukraine. And in that sense, of course, finding more contacts and connections in the West by building a relationship, by making going there more often, visiting the capitals, trying to find traction points, and also going to the Middle East, and then trying to discover once again countries like India and others. And then this is what has been happening, and I don't think that it's going to change, even if we are to see a change to the leadership in Armenia, because everyone has been seeing what's going on. And then the leadership that wants to keep the country, they will have to continue diversifying and probably drifting away from Russia if it keeps with current very assertive stance that you are either with me or with no one. And so we will see more drills, we will see more visits, we will see more attempts. And of course, what's happening right now with Azerbaijan and Turkey is in many cases undermines all these attempts, because for Armenia, it's not only just losing its state because of the next coming war, with very fear, but also losing the prospect of getting closer to probably more international alliances. And many of them don't want to get closer and getting better closer cooperation to those who are in conflict with the neighbors. So if Armenia finds the way to seal deals with Azerbaijan, Turkey, if Azerbaijan finds the way to reconcile with some of the suggestions and some of the realities that are present in Nagorno-Karabakh, that would give such a huge prospect for changes for the whole South Caucasus, I would say, not just for Armenia only.
Thanks. So our question from Christopher Grandage on, is there anything at all that Baku might be willing to concede or compromise on? It's taken such an immobile and so maximalist a position. If there is going to be any compromise, where could it be?
I mean, this prevalent question is asked many times by the experts, and also this is one of the key question, and the answer is coming from Baku is that we are not going to compromise anything related to Azerbaijan internationally recognized borders, mainly when it comes to the Armenian populated Nagorno-Karabakh, but some tactically saying that we already compromise that our stance on the corridor connectivity is bypassing Armenian territory, that we are not asking the extraterritorial stance, the control. So this is what some people in Baku, some officials actually described as their compromise. And when it comes to the rights, security, and making this much more the let's say internationally observed process, I think they say that we are not going to compromise, and we are going to de-internalize, de-institutionalize, and so this is the position we see they're coming from Azerbaijan.
So we've already compromised, so we don't have to do any more compromising. We have a question from our colleague, Berkay Mandirachi, who asks, okay, General Assembly maybe isn't going to get us anything, but the European Political Community meeting is coming up on October 5th. Last year, Pashinyan and Aliyev met in Prague through that forum, and it seemed to open the door for something positive, even if It has since been a difficult year. What are the prospects for that, offering some opportunities? So Alesa first, and then Zaur.
It's a very good question, and it's definitely something that should be raised. It's very unfortunate that there is still no confirmed meeting of foreign ministers at the upcoming annual gathering in New York City at the UN General Assembly. Who knows, maybe they still can come at the very last moment. That could so much help. On the one hand, it could reassure both Armenia, but also foreign mediators that Azerbaijan is still willing to negotiate in a good faith. But also maybe that could be an opportunity to finally make some deal over with blockade to relieve the situation in Nagorno-Karabakh. Winter is coming. It will be very difficult for people to continue living in this situation when you don't have enough food and you don't even have a prospect of getting that food. Not to mention the fact that there is a shortage of electricity because of the electric lines, and also the gas supply is non-existent in that place for months now. So it could be so good. If it doesn't happen, then of course there is this meeting that got promised by the European Union many months ago, and the hope was that that meeting would be the place for a very good ceremony of Armenia and Azerbaijan sealing the peace deal. And there were so many efforts to make it happen. And then, yes, it's frustrating that it's not happening, but maybe still that could be a possibility to somehow to have a conversation. I haven't heard that the preparations are going on that meeting, I should say, and that's a bad sign. That means that we might miss the opportunity, see with opportunity missed again as well.
Thank you. Zaur, anything to add on that?
Actually, there might be a few months ago, if someone asked this question and everyone was much more hopeful that they might be a seal of the deal between Baku and Yerevan, and they might sign in the meeting in October. But right now, this is the also distant prospect. Unfortunately, the region saw a lot of the golden moments. And unfortunately, this is even the last year. So, I mean, we are passing all of these moments. So, but I hope that until the October, this meeting, there will be some development that actually decrease any kind of the new war, increase the chance of the prospect of the talks. So this is the only how we are believing.
Thank you. And I'm afraid this next question is going to be our last one. And I'm so sorry to everybody who asked excellent questions, which I did not manage to answer. But we have a few questions that I'm going to, again, bundle together on the EU, with Cherigashvili asking us to assess the role of the EU, and Gaia Durante Mangoni asking whether the EU's dependence on Azerbaijani gas is in some ways robbing it of some of its leverage. So, well, can the EU still make a difference other than with the tripwire provided by its people on the border in Armenia? What can the EU still do? I'm going to let Alesa speak first, and then give Zaur the last word.
Yeah, I will say something very short. I would just say that the European Union, we criticize them a lot, we raise questions, but it's fascinating what we have been seeing from the European Union during this year and a half in terms of its readiness to invest and engage, mediate, continue kind of making calls, and the visits, deployment of the EU mission to the Armenian-Azerbaijani border that was done surprisingly fast, for the European Union. And such a enormous commitment coming from Brussels. There will be many more things that will have to be done. It's really unfortunate that the European Union has and its representatives, they have to learn about and on their own mistakes in many cases. But there are the things, and then there are the things where they have to invest even more. I mean, this is not the situation where you can really stay half-hearted, I would say. You will have to continue investing and doing the things. But yeah, overall, I would say it's really very good that the European Union is there, that they continue investing. I hope that it will stay in place even next year when we are to see elections. It's important that they continue coordinating with the United States. And it's really very good that the European Union, its bureaucracy, stays more or less flexible on even having some contacts with Russia when it comes to Nagorno-Karabakh.
Thank you. Zaur?
I think the EU's contribution is the welcome in the both capitals, and also often see EU as an impartial partner, but also the both countries has a different kind of the relationship with EU on economic matters. So, but the question is about that whether the gas deal is influence the EU's decision making on Azerbaijan. I will say this: the gas deal signed back to 2013. It was clear that by 2020 and this period of time, Azerbaijan will have exported gas, which amount. So the Ukrainian war might be accelerated this process, but this is overall the policy of the Southern gas corridor is on the place for many years and decades, I will say, and this was seen by Western countries as strategic one. If it's influenced beforehand, what EU weight in the peace process. So, but I see the less influence of the gas deal because it's not going to replace the Russian gas in the entire Europe. It's only focused on very Balkan geography. But adding one thing is that my one concern is that EU's contribution is welcome, but the question is that how sustainable will be next year, as Olesa pointed out, because of the election. So that's why it might be more focused, more sustained way of the engagement is necessary in the coming weeks and the months.
Thank you so much. So thank you tremendously to our panelists, to Olesa, to Zaur, and to Oleg for a hugely informative, if rather bleak discussion. I think we'll be watching to see what happens both in New York and on the ground in the South Caucasus in the days and weeks to come. I want to thank all of our guests for their engagement, for such excellent questions. I am so sorry we could not get to all of them. I see so many more questions that I also would like to hear the answers to, but very sadly, we are out of time. The event recording is going to be available on our YouTube channel and also at www.crisisgroup.org/event-recordings. So if you enjoyed this conversation, think others could learn from it, please direct them in that direction. I think I learned from this conversation, and I hope you did as well. Thank you so much, and we'll be watching, and we will be hoping for the best. Thank you and goodbye.
Thank you.